Shalom, everyone. This video is going to be a video on Mashiach Ben Yosef, as is elucidated in our ancient Israeli Kabbalah. And I guess you could say that this video is more geared towards my ignorant and spiritually blind Jews who don't understand or know that there are two Mashiachim, or even let alone about Mashiach Ben Yosef, right? So in true Orthodox Judaism, as is taught and was known by our ancient sages, it was known that there would be two Mashiachim, vis-a-vis Mashiach Ben Yosef and Mashiach Ben David. And so this is really important to understand, because there are certain modern Jews that have become divorced from our ancient Judaic roots. As a recent anecdote, I was recently debating with a Kabbalistic Rab who kept on hammering me about being like a foolish Christian in believing that there are two comings of Mashiach, to which my wife's response was, you do know that there are two Mashiachim, and two Mashiachim imply two comings. And that immediately shut his mouth. Nevertheless, I want to begin with a very ancient passage found in a very old, highly respected Kabbalist, who happened to be the grandnephew and disciple of the Vilna Gaon, who is one of our most respected sages and Kabbalists within the past 1,000 years. And he writes in a book entitled Kol HaTor, or The Voice of the Turtle Dove, in chapter 5, portion 2, line 30, he states, "How strong is the force of the Sitra Achra, that it managed to hide from the eyes of our holy patriarchs the dangers of the Klipoth layers, from the eyes of our patriarch Abraham, the Klippa of Yishmael, from the eyes of Yitzchak, the Klippa of Esau, and from the eyes of our patriarch Yaakov, the Klippa of the Teraphim. During the footsteps of Mashiach, the Sitra Achra becomes even stronger in order to strike the Rabbanan, or the biblical scholars, with blindness." Now, this is a very important warning, because we Kabbalists understand the great dangers in spiritual blindness. That is, that spiritual blindness can occur to even the greatest and most initiated saint, to even the wisest and most well-taught saint, and even in some cases to holy saints. To some of the holiest saints this can occur to. And these prototypes, these archetypes, these examples are found in the Torah, where we read that Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, our patriarchs, are the most holiest saints, gods in the flesh, we may say, as holy as they were, as initiated as they were, even they had weak spots and blind spots, great blind spots. If our ancient holy patriarchs had spiritual blindness, how much more their sons, their seed, us, Yisrael? And then this is why he also states in the same book, in chapter 2, line 39, he states, "Yosef recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Mashiach Ben Yosef recognizes his brothers, but they do not recognize him. This is the work of Hasatan, who hides the characteristics of Mashiach." And indeed it is the case, because the vast majority of Christians and Jews are blind to all of the characteristics of Mashiach. The Jews understand a few characteristics of Mashiach, but by no means all, at least the vast majority of them. And the vast majority of Christians understand some of the characteristics of Mashiach, but by no means all of them. And this is the great secret and mystery behind our ancient divine oracles, where Yeshayahu in chapter 8, verse 14 states, "And he, Mashiach, shall be a stumbling block and an offensive rock to both houses of Israel." Who are both houses of Israel? the only two houses that matter in the entire world, the Christians and the Jews. The Christians and the Jews are the both houses of Israel vis-a-vis Beit Ephraim and Beit Yehuda. These are the two houses of Israel, and Mashiach is a stumbling block to both of these houses. This is why Paul, a most initiated Kabbalist, a Pharisee of Pharisees, writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23, he states, "But we preach a crucified Mashiach, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks or the Goyim foolishness." He is a stumbling block to the Jews with respect to Mashiach Ben Yosef, whom they missed, and who is hidden from them. And he is foolishness to the Christians. That is, Christians are foolish. Christians are so foolish. Many of them are so stupid and ignorant in that they reject the Torah, the Holy Covenant. They do not observe the Holy Covenant, and many of them do not even have the full knowledge and wisdom of the Holy Covenant. And they have violated the Holy Covenant. What is the entire ancient Hebrew scriptures all about? The entire motif running throughout the entire ancient Hebrew scriptures is the constant violation of the Holy Covenant by Israel. Nothing has changed. Mashiach came to the lost sheep, to the Goyim, to the lost 10 tribes of Israel, to the Christians. He gave them the Holy Covenant, he renewed it for them, and what did they do? They spit back in his face and rejected it, teaching foolishness and lies and deception that he did away with the Holy Covenant. What foolishness, what stupidity. So he's a stumbling block to both houses. And who does this? Hasatan is the one who has hidden these characteristics from both houses. And so we all holy saints and adepts and initiates must be on holy guard all of the time to spiritual blindness. We must be spiritually holy and open, because we are susceptible in great ways to spiritual blindness in many ways. We may be blind to certain doctrines, as there are certain Jews and Christians that are blind and ignorant on the ancient veracious esoteric doctrine of metempsychosis, or a Jew who is blind to who Mashiach Ben Yosef is, or to a Christian who is blind to the fact that he must observe and keep the Holy Covenant. And so this is a great danger, and it seems that only the most initiated Kabbalists understand this very mystical point. But now let us proceed to what the ancient HaQabbalah has to state on Mashiach Ben Yosef. We read in Talmud Bavli in Tractate Sanhedrin, folio 98b, it states, the ancient sages ask this question. They ask, what is the name of Mashiach? Well, the Rabbanan say that his name is the leper scholar, as it is written in Sefer Yeshayahu, chapter 53, verse 4, surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him a leper, smitten of Elohim and afflicted. Right? So there's been this great controversy for the past 2,000 years between Jews and Christians as to who this suffering servant in Yeshayahu chapter 53 refers to, and we still have many stupid and ignorant Jews, many of them Rabbanan and scholars, and I even shudder to even call them scholars from Rabbanan, that such a basic point would go over their head, right? But here we have our ancient sages who explicitly state that this verse of the suffering servant is explicitly in reference to Mashiach. No questions about it. And now this takes us into another way much more mystical verse in Sefer HaZohar in Book 2, Folio 95b, in the Cremona edition. It states, those souls which are in the lowest paradise hover about and look through the world, and when they see suffering or ill, and those who suffer for the unity of their master, they return and inform Mashiach of the afflictions of Israel in exile. Then he, Mashiach, lifts up his voice and weeps, as it is written, and he is wounded for our transgressions. And in the Garden of Eden is a palace, which is called the Palace of the Wicked Children. Mashiach goes up into this palace and calls all the sufferings, pains, and tribulations of Israel to come upon himself. If he had not thus taken them upon himself, the punishment of Israel for the transgressions of Torah, not any man would be able to endure the sufferings of it, as it is written, in truth he took upon himself our sickness. Again, even in our esoteric Kabbalistic literature, which understands that Yeshayahu 53 is a reference to Mashiach, goes on to explain some of the mysteries and secrets behind these messianic verses in our divine oracles, right? So the point is that I have only cited two of my favorite citations that prove from the ancient sages in our ancient Jewish literature that Yeshayahu 53 is a reference to Mashiach Ben Yosef, that is. But there are numerous other citations in our ancient Jewish literature, in our Midrashim, in our Talmudim, in our Kabbalistic texts, numerous citations. It would just take too long, for me to put them all out here and go all through them. But you can go online, and there are many good websites where there are many Rabbanan that will give you these numerous citations. There are many. There are just many. But these are two of my favorite, and these are the seals. These are the only two seals you need to prove that these are messianic verses in reference to Mashiach Ben Yosef, despite what any ignorant or spiritually blind Jew may say. And of course, this is then the illumination that is of the verse that is found in the New Testament in the first book of John, in chapter 4, verse 10, where John states he sent his son to be the atonement for our sins, right? Of course, this is clear to any Christian. Now we proceed to talk about the stone or the rock, which is a Kabbalistic code word in the Kabbalah for Elohim, or even for Mashiach, right? We read in Talmud Bavli in Tractate Sukkah in folio 58b, it states, "It is correct for the one who states that Mashiach Ben Yosef was killed, corresponding to the verse, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son," quoting Sefer Zachariah chapter 12 verse 10, right? So what are the ancient sages saying here? They're saying Mashiach Ben Yosef is going to be killed. Who is he going to be killed by? Well, the ancient divine oracle tells us that we, Israel, are going to kill him, right? The ancient divine oracles, which were given to Israel, spoken to Israel, state, "And they shall look upon me whom they have pierced. It is us, Israel, who have pierced him, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son." The ancient sages knew this. They knew that Mashiach Ben Yosef was going to be killed, and they knew that it was going to be us that were going to kill him. But again, many of the late Jews, ignorant and spiritually blind, again, I think this just goes over their head for whatever reason. And then this is why we then read in Sefer Breshit in chapter 49, verse 24, it states, "For there is the stone, the shepherd of Israel." So this is where we are given the Kabbalistic equation between the ancient Hebrew word Eben, which is stone, and Mashiach. The shepherd of Israel is an exclusive reference to Mashiach. And so here we have the mystical equation, so that now we know that this Hebrew code word stone is always going to be a reference to Mashiach. But there's a very even deeper mystical significance behind this Hebrew word Eben when you understand ancient Hebrew and are fluent in it, and can properly break down the Hebrew word into its components. We read in the ancient Aramaic translation of this verse in the Torah, in Targum Onkelos, it's the ancient Aramaic rendition of the verse is, "By his word he pastures the fathers and sons of the seed of Israel," right? So here for stone they have fathers and sons, which is a mystical indication to a deeper Kabbalistic significance behind the word Eben, or stone, right? Because in Hebrew, the word stone is spelled with Aleph, Bet, Nun. And it is basically, the word Eben, or stone, is a compound word between the Hebrew word Ab, which is father, and Ben, which is son. The first two letters of the word Eben, which are Aleph and Bet, spell father, or Ab, and the last two letters of the word Eben, which are Bain and Nun, spell Ben, which means son. So it's basically a union. The word Eben represents the mystical union between the Father and the Son. And this is the great secret and mystery behind where it states in Sefer Yochanan, or the book of John, chapter 10, verse 30, where Yeshua states, "I and the Father are one," right? And because it's in reference to this very esoteric mystical significance behind the word Eben, or stone. He is the stone, he is the shepherd of Yisrael, and the Hebrew word Eben mystically represents the union between the Father and the Son, being one. But now let us proceed to what Rashbi, or Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the divine initiator behind the principal Kabbalistic treatises, is what he has to say in a very, very secret Kabbalistic treatise that's not even known to many Kabbalists, which is called The Secrets of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, where, speaking on Mashiach, he states, "They will scorn him, as the scripture states, despised and abandoned by men," in Sefer Yeshayahu, chapter 53, verse 3. "And he shall withdraw and be hidden from them," as scripture continues, "like one hiding faces from us." Right? Again, so we can see how the most ancient, initiated Kabbalists and saints and Rabbanan, they understood the secrets and mysteries behind Mashiach Ben Yosef. They understood that there was two Mashiachim, that Mashiach Ben Yosef was going to be killed. He was going to be killed by us Israelites. They understood that he was going to be despised and abandoned by many men and Israelites. They understood that he was going to be hidden from many Jews and many Israelites. They understood this, right? Again, we're dealing with the minority versus the majority. Again, it is only going to be a minority of Israelites who are going to be fully initiated into the holy mysteries and be elite saints and be part of the elect. But it is going to be the vast majority that is going to be inferior, profane, and uninitiated in many respects. And this is exactly what we find. How many Christians violate the Holy Covenant? Practically all of them. How many Jews don't know who Mashiach Ben Yosef is? Practically all of them. It is but only a handful in every generation that can truly call themselves the elect and the most highly initiated of the initiates. Now, let us proceed to some very, very interesting points that are made about Mashiach Ben Yosef and the Lurianic Kabbalah by Chaim Vital, one of our most initiated Kabbalists, right? This is very, very interesting here. We find in his magnus opus, Eitz Chaim, in a very esoteric book called Gates of Reincarnation, which deals exclusively with all of the secrets and mysteries behind reincarnation, in Gate 9 in Branch 1. In this specific branch, he's actually talking about extremely, extremely esoteric concept or idea in the Kabbalah that's not really well understood by many Kabbalists. But we're not going to get into that here. But in this branch, he makes some very interesting points on Mashiach. This is what he has to say. He states, "It is not insignificant that King David is the prototype of Mashiach, and these two, Doeg and Achitophel, with their great minds and keen perceptions, were the most implicable and most dangerous of his enemies. Typical of secret agents working behind the lines, with these questions they wanted to confound and confuse, hoping in a way to cast doubts upon the legitimacy of the royal dynasty of David. Furthermore, they wanted to uncover a secret weakness in the root of King David's soul. In this way, they hoped to gain the power to stop the redemption." Now, this is very important because I just cited one part of the passage of the passage here in the branch, but in this branch, he goes a little bit more into detail, explaining how Doeg and Achitophel, who were the chief advisors and counselors to King Shaul, right, were very adamant in basically stopping and killing King David. And these two counselors or advisors were likened to be the greatest advisors and counselors and sages of all of Israel in this generation. Now, in context, we have to understand that there were so many things going against King David, right? We have the issue of Yehuda's sexual immorality with Tamar, being his daughter-in-law. We have the issue of his matriarch Ruth, who was known to be a Moabite, and the Torah strictly prohibits the marriage between any Moabite and Israelite. We have the issue of David's adultery, and there's many more issues in context that were against David, we could say. There's so many issues contextually that would be able, that sort of weaken David's legitimacy and holiness, right, to the royal dynasty, right? Contextually, this was clearly understood by these very wise men in that generation, right? They knew all the stuff that was going on in King David's life and his genealogy, etc. They were very well aware of this, right? This was all recorded even in their time. And so in context, we have Doeg and Achitophel, who are the chief counselors and advisors, the most elite and best counselors and advisors of their generation, advising King Shaul of Israel, right, against King David. Who is King David? He is the prophet. He is the true king in that generation. But the standing king, the standing Sanhedrin during that generation, went against David. So what we see here conceptually is that it was the leading sages, the leading counselors, the leading advisors, but really the leading sages and scholars, the leading princes, the leading king, that all went against David, who was the true prophet and the true king in that generation. And we already know that David is the prototype of Mashiach. So then we know that this acts as an archetype or a prototype to Mashiach Ben Yosef. Right? And this is the great secret and mystery of the verse in Sefer Bamidbar in the Torah in chapter 16, verse 2, where it states, "And there rose up against Moshe with certain of the sons of Israel 250 princes of the assembly or the Sanhedrin, famous in the congregation, men of renown." We know that Moshe was also a prototype of Mashiach. So what do we see here? We see a running motif in the ancient scriptures, right? King David, who is a prototype of Mashiach, was rejected, despised, and they attempted to kill him. Who? The leading sages, the leading scholars, the leading princes, and the king of Israel at that time. Same thing with Moshe. He's a prototype of Mashiach. He was despised. They wanted to kill him, and they rejected him. Who? In his generation? The princes of the Sanhedrin, the leading scholars, the leading scribes, the leading priests, they all went against Moshe, right? It was the leading rulers, the elite, the elect in the generation of David, in the generation of Moshe, that went up against these two great holy saints and patriarchs. And it's no different with Yeshua. Who were the leading men in Israel? Who were the men in Israel that went up against Mashiach Ben Yosef? Yeshua Mashiach Ben Yosef. Well, it was the Sanhedrin, it was the scribes, it was the Pharisees, right? It was the leading elect men of his generation that went up against Yeshua. But again, apparently, it seems perhaps maybe that some of this stuff too went over the head of Chaim Vital, because I see no explicit reference to Yeshua HaMashiach in his writings. But at least he understands these hidden, mysterious dynamics. And so now I conclude this presentation with a very nice chart that shows all of the mystical equations and parallels between Yosef and Yeshua. And so, here, I don't want to read every single one of them out, but here, we can see here all of these mystical parallels, right? We see that Yosef was the favorite son, just as Yeshua was the beloved son. Yosef was a shepherd. Yeshua was a good shepherd. Yosef was called in Hebrew Na'ar, which is the Yalth, and Yeshua was also called the Na'ar or the Yalth. Yosef was sent by his father to find his brothers and return to him. Yeshua was sent by his father to the lost sheep of Israel and returned to him. Yosef was thrown into a pit. Yeshua was laid into a grave. Yehuda suggested to sell Yosef for silver. Yehuda of Kriot sold Yeshua for silver as well. Yosef was jailed with two prisoners, one who was raised up and one who was killed. Yeshua was crucified with two thieves, one who went to paradise, the other death. Yosef, Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Yosef was not in the pit. And in regards to Yeshua, they entered in and did not find Yeshua's body. Yosef faced temptation and overcame. Yeshua faced temptation and overcame. Both were 30 years old when they began to rule or began their ministry. Their brothers did not recognize them. Both were concealed. Yosef was concealed in Egypt, and so was Yeshua for a time when he was young. Yosef was made ruler over all of the Goyim. Yeshua inherits all the Goyim. Yosef was arrayed in linen and gold, just as was Yeshua. Both were given a new name, right? Yosef was given a new name by the Egyptians or the Goyim, which was Zofnat Paneach, which is revealer of the mysteries. And Yeshua was given a new name by the Goyim as well, which is Jesus. and both will be given a new name by Elohim in the future. You know, Psalms 81 gives a new name to Yosef, which is Yehoseph, and a new name will be given to Yeshua as well. And it states this in the book of Revelation. Both sent their brothers away twice, right? You know, Yeshua exiled Israel twice, just as Joseph sent his brothers away twice. And both of them will reveal themselves to their brethren upon their third return, right? And these are just a few, you know, very mystical parallels between Yosef and Yeshua, but there are many. There are many, many more. Again, there's many websites you can go on to, you know, read more about these parallels. One interesting one is their names, right? You know, Yosef is known as Yosef Ben Yaakov, and Yeshua is known as Yeshua Ben Yosef Ben Yaakov, because his earthly father, so to speak, even though we know he didn't have an earthly father, but technically you could say it was Yosef Ben Yaakov, you know, as is recorded in the genealogies. So, all in all, some interesting stuff, and hopefully some ignorant, spiritually blind Jews will see this video and be convinced of who truly is Mashiach Ben Yosef, which is Yeshua, you know, Yeshua Ben Yosef Ben Yaakov HaMashiach. So hopefully some Jews' eyes will be opened. Amen.